Today I'm talking with Scarlett Sahota. She talked about being in the agile space before knowing what agile is, by having an agile coach as a parent, about finding people that care for you, and allowing someone to mentor you. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button, because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone, and with me I have Scarlett. Scarlett, welcome.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
And to be here, let's bring this on screen. For me, here is Belgium, where I am in Ghent, and you're in Toronto somewhere. And if Google wants to help out, it should show us a little bit where you are. It's somewhere in Toronto, I think. Of course, we're not looking for the exact location. But yeah, and for me on my side, it's a few minutes after 6 o'clock in the evening. What time is it on your side?
It's just a couple minutes after noon here.
Yeah, so we see that. Well, of course, Toronto is a completely other side of the world, so we're in different time zones. Even as well. So yeah, that's how the world is these days. Let's put it like that. But Scarlett, we jumped right into that. But tell the people who are here a little bit, who are you?
All right. Well, I am an anime enthusiast. I love to go to the gym, but I think we're here to talk about agile or something like that. So I'll jump a little bit into that. I have been in the agile space since before I knew what the agile space was. I had an agile coach as a parent. So, as you can imagine, I was a guinea pig for a very long time. But as I got older and started to understand what I had been learning and what I had been educated about from a young age, I couldn't imagine existing in a different way, going back to what people considered normal. So even though I've jumped from different jobs, I did a business analyst job, I was a full stack developer for a little while, I did user experience design, a little bit of QA. I ended up coming back to, I guess, my roots, and I now work as a Scrum Master, although I consider myself more an agile practitioner. Scrum, Kanban, whatever people want to do, I don't really care, so long as it works and people are happy. Currently working at a company called Lumetto, and we're trying to make the world a better place by digitizing healthcare-based learning so that nurses, doctors can use VR to practice learning, whatever lessons, whatever types of procedures they want to do. Instead of just sticking their nose in a textbook, then the next thing they do is cut open a person.
Preferable they learn something before they do that, and yeah, and in the old days they might learn to cut open persons or cut open bodies from that people. But if VR can help us with that, it feels a little bit a little bit better. And it's interesting that you say you were doing agile before you knew what agile was in a way. I can imagine. Well, as a father, I have no idea how much of these ideas will be picked up. So I definitely find it interesting to have that conversation.
Well, we had weekend planning meetings, so it was pretty it was pretty on the nose, whether it's more subconscious behavioral patterns. We also had very explicit weekend planning meetings. Let's review how that went. Did we think we able to complete everything? Why not? Going through all of that stuff as a kid. Yeah.
Did you do retrospectives at the end of the year or things like that? So that's an interesting part as well.
We definitely didn't call them that, but whenever there was a problem, we'd basically retro the problem and talk about why we thought it was happening, and how we could like what was going wrong, why it was going wrong, what were the influences for it, different solutions without committing to anything. then we get out the sticky notes and we talk about the amount of effort for each solution and what value it would bring and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it
And did you
was.
ever had the idea like, Dad, stop coaching me, or something, things like that, or are you not allowed to talk about that?
No, no, it wasn't. I think when you consider something normal, it doesn't occur to you that it's not normal. For example, I'm
Mm.
someone who has a continuous monologue in my head. And when my partner said to me that he just doesn't think sometimes, I was like, "What are you talking about? That's
Mm.
not something that's possible. You don't have a continuous monologue in your head." So that was my discovery that my normal isn't necessarily his normal. So for me, with my dad coaching me, um I just thought that's what parenting was. I didn't understand it could be different or it would be different because both my parents had such different parenting styles that I just figured those were both normal.
It's just one is just like, okay, that's how a dad behaves, or
Mhm.
that's one part of the thing behaves. That's interesting, and especially indeed if parenting styles might be different. So that's definitely interesting to learn also as a parent, to see what's happening. At the same time, in the earlier conversation, I don't know how deep you want to go into that, but
Mhm.
when you said about watching your dad, this is for you, is it feels already different. Like, okay, there's a public speaking person, not so much feels like your dad, because that feels different, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I used to go, like, he used to take me to work with him and I'd help him out, if he was having any, I guess, like emotional triggers, like something in the conversation kind of, grated at him. Like, I could see it. I could see it right away because children are hypersensitive to their parents' moods a lot of the time. And so I'd be like, Dad, I mean, Michael, no. Um, so I think for me it was just a different side of him, and well, it doesn't like it's not super comfortable for me. I think it's just because I don't know where I fit with him
Mm.
in these environments and within these spaces. Yeah, I've worked with him even when I was working at CGI. He came in and did some coaching, and it was a running joke. I was like, "Don't worry, leave Michael to me. Like he and I have a great relationship. Like I'll handle the coordination of his schedule." And people at work were like, "How do you know Michael?" I'm like, "No, I've known him for years. Like don't worry about it." but but when I'm actually on site with him, it's so different. And then conferences are different, and all of these environments are so different, especially when I was younger, because I didn't know where I fit even without him. So trying to find my place with him there, and with the constant reminder that I am his child, was a little bit challenging.
I can imagine. At the same time, you're one of these people that actually saw your parents, or at least one of your parents, in action.
Mhm.
Because I do remember I did some workshops with my father, but
Mhm.
other than that, when I visited my father at work, I never had any idea what he did. He did something with
Mhm.
computers, and I was allowed to play on computers at that time, but that's about it. I have no idea what he was doing until, yeah, 10 years later, or 20 years later, when I joined one way or another. So
Mhm.
so you actually saw him in action, and worked with him. So that's indeed it's a complete, it's, yeah, you're a different person. And of course, as a child, you're always, well, there is always a parent-child relationship, of course, which is always a different kind of thing than if you have a colleague.
Mhm.
So that's an interesting. Okay, we jumped right into that, but it's I want to go to that first question, and maybe we kind of talked already about it, but maybe that could be something else as well. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Yeah, so I think there's so many influencing factors about me, but I think the biggest thing that has influenced me as a person that people might not know is my family has this sort of bad habit of being a complete jerk to people.
Mm.
And it's very much something that I've seen multiple members of my family struggle with, just not being able to put aside efficiency and effectiveness for empathy and wanting to get
Mm.
results over people. And I think I'm very fortunate that I noticed that trait in myself coming up a lot when I was younger. This is something I think I've been working on since I was 14, 15, 16. It was to the point where my peers would actually call me like an alien or a robot, like learning computer, because I was so um, bad with people. There's just like, it was like I didn't know how to talk to people because I was so focused on the outcome. I didn't really like, people were just factors in that.
So you
And
were
that
focused on the efficiency at that point. If you when you talked about efficient versus effective, how should I see it?
Yeah, it's like, let's say, let's take a group project in school, right? I didn't really care if someone was going through something or what was going on with them. I just couldn't understand why they didn't just do their work. And so there
Mm.
was no exploration, there was no compassion, there was no empathy for other people, especially when people would get things wrong. Because I put
Mm.
such an emphasis on myself to be correct, I would often get angry or upset, even if I didn't outright blame them for it or get into a confrontation with them about it. I had a
But
lot of
internally, you
self-talk.
blame them.
Yeah, yeah,
Inter- And so what I'm hearing is that somehow that radiated out, even if you didn't want
hmm
to say it.
a
Okay,
hundred
and
percent.
so
Yeah, and people made me pretty uncomfortable just in general. I was never very good with people, and I decided I didn't really like that. So I just worked on it. It was just reminding myself I was okay and that it was fine and we didn't need to do X or Y, and that the pressure was coming from me and coming from my own perspective and all of that kind of stuff. And eventually, you don't really notice the changes happening as they happen. But nowadays, the feedback I get from people is like, you're so compassionate, you're so kind, you're so patient. And I'm like, yes, I have done it. I have grown into the person that I really want to be. And when I tell people these stories, they're like, I can't even imagine that. Like, you're such a different person than you used to be from your description and from the way people, my peers, my friends were describing me. That people are shocked to hear that. They're like, you're personable. And I'm like, now, yeah.
but it sounds also that in that transition you were also very hard on yourself, or you were really
Mhm.
like you looked at yourself from the outside and saw some things that you didn't like, and you worked well, if you start working on things like that from 14, 16-year old,
Mhm.
that's incredible. I mean, yeah, if you are where you are now at your young age already, that's fantastic, because I know some 40 and 50 years old that are not even there yet. So yeah, that's really great if you can first of all see that at that age,
Mhm.
because seeing it at that young age, especially, well, if I look at I have people 14, 15, I have a daughter of 15 years old, and so I can I'm into that world in a way as a
Mhm.
father, and it's definitely something that yeah, I see a lot of, yeah, people that age around us that are not at that level to understand this already.
Mhm.
So that's great. And do you have
Yeah.
any idea where that trigger came from? What you made you realize that?
Um, it was actually my then partner. He started pointing out the way I was condescending to people when I spoke, even if I didn't intend it. And for his family, I mean, his family is not necessarily the healthiest dynamic, but that's something I noticed from them, is how attentive and attuned they were to other people's feelings. Whereas my family was more like, your feelings are the only important ones, and you could kind of trample on other people's feelings. And obviously, or maybe not obviously, but that has definitely changed since I've gotten older, and we've all gotten more aware of our emotions and our feelings and more sensitive to it and grown. But it was something that was pointed out to me, and I think this is what's interesting about teenagers and just learning in general. When you point something out to them, you might see an immediate rejection, but
Mm.
in my experience, just because it's an immediate rejection doesn't mean they don't hear you. It means they're not ready to accept it at this time. So they might be ready to accept it in a year or 3 years or 5 years. But at least for me, I thought a lot about what people said to me, even if I disagreed with it, because sometimes little things would stick. And even if I didn't want to admit it at the time or I couldn't admit it, I knew somewhere inside of me that it was true. And so I would start thinking about it, and then eventually, once that sort of almost defense mechanism calmed down and it allowed that comment to just be a comment and it wasn't like harmful or scary or offensive, I could start to acknowledge it and acknowledge whether or not I wanted to work on whatever that comment was about. And most of the time, the answer was yes.
So that also means for me that, yeah, somehow, yeah, like you say, the first time you get feedback from most of us, the most important feedback usually hurts, and we
Hmm.
kind of reject it. It doesn't. It's independent of what age it is, but especially if you're a teenager, that's the thing that you're in your world, and every kind of feedback is really, yeah,
Hmm.
it's hurtful and heartful. I don't know how to say it, but if it's coming from somebody that you care about, of course there's people. Yeah, then you think, and like you say, you had that internal monologue going on that probably you're thinking about it, and so damn it, that person is right. I don't like it,
Hmm.
but he's right or
Hmm.
she's right.
Yeah.
So that's definitely. And do you know if, because you said about your because in your family that was that dynamic as well,
Hmm.
did there change anything in that family dynamic that made you also realize that, maybe see it first in the people around you, or did you, was there a different environment that helped you there to
Yeah, yeah. So there were a couple environments that really helped me. One of the first environments was also just seeing that it wasn't necessarily, it was my normal, but it wasn't everyone's normal, and that I got to see that sort of with my first partner's family. But what really I think helped me was actually my first job, and I was working at CGI with Ron Laudadio and Chris Jurin, and they're amazing people. And I had never felt so safe and so validated and so trusted. And having someone else like give me that type of validation, give me that type of trust, give me all of those, um, I guess, forms of endearment almost was so needed for me coming out, because my parents got divorced when I was a teenager and things were a total mess
Mm,
for a really long time, and that first partner was not very kind to me. So I had not experienced that kind of, really accepting environment before. And that's really when the changes started to happen. It was once I had someone that really had that unconditional trust and appreciation for me that I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to be around people that don't give me this. I don't have to give them the time of day. And that's really when my life started to really take a turn.
And I can also imagine, and again, I don't want to go in there if you don't want to go, but I can imagine if you're a teenager when your parents get divorced, or if you're
Hmm.
in the middle of that, I think that most people, when their parents get divorced, are somewhere in the middle, because you don't want to make a choice, but at the same time, you see them arguing one way or another, or you don't see
Hmm.
them arguing, but you still feel that something is wrong. Then definitely that doesn't help to create that safe environment, I can imagine.
Yeah,
Did the
for sure.
go?
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, and for me, I was very much made sort like, and I don't blame my parents for this. Like, let me just put that out. They're doing
mhm.
their best,
Yeah.
They're their own people, and I've moved past this, worked through it, whatever it might be. And I acknowledge that, I had two younger brothers, and often because there were three of us and they were fighting, and my father was traveling and my mom was dealing with her own stuff, I was put in a role or expectation that I would sort of be another parent for my brothers. And this happened.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think it was ever, well, it might have been explicitly said a couple of times, but I think that really impacted like that feeling of safety, is that I couldn't even take care of myself, but I felt like there was this expectation, whether it actually did come from my parents or whether it came from me. I felt like it was there, so I couldn't feel safe in those environments because of those expectations.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. Yeah, it's not healthy to in a young age to feel responsible for your and
Hmm.
as a, if you're the oldest, somehow we pick that up. I'm also the oldest in my family, and
Hmm.
well, even if my parents did not get divorced, I still felt at some points responsible, and it's
Hmm.
never healthy. I was lucky that my parents made it at some point very clear that that was not my role,
Hmm.
but that, yeah, I can imagine. Did the fact that, again, I don't want to go too much in detail because we're going there, but did the fact that after your parents got divorced, did that ease it in a way for your to also make space for yourself?
Not really, because I like my mom ended up as primary caregiver, and that meant
Mm.
I was co-primary caregiver for most of
Yeah,
the time.
that didn't happen. That didn't help, of course.
Yeah, it helped in some ways. Like, I think there is so much benefit to not being in an environment where two people who do not like each other. Like, that was terrible. And totally understandable. When I'm with people I don't like, I'm obviously not my best self. But I think divorce is a really good thing. I think it makes a ton of sense. I think it's so helpful for the children to not be in that environment and to let them know that if something isn't making you happy or if something isn't making you comfortable, then you can leave. And I think that's
Mm.
a really important message that some of my friends whose parents I was like, maybe they should get at least marriage counseling, if not a divorce, um, stayed
But I,
together.
that's why I was asking, because indeed, and
Mhm.
divorce is never nice, and there's all
Mhm.
these things. But people that should divorce and not divorce is probably worse for the children. That's
Hun-
something I've heard many times. It's yeah,
Mhm.
it's like you said, it's not a healthy environment to
Mhm.
grow up with. And even if your parents at some point loved each other, if the love is gone, and if yeah, if it doesn't help, then yeah, you see all these kind of bad examples. But somehow you were able, even very early, if I say,
Mhm.
because you're still rather young, to break away from that, and
Mhm.
still, yeah, break away from that environment, and have a different look at yourself. So that's very nice.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
so.
my
Thanks
stepmom
for
really
sharing.
helped with that. She was
Mm.
great. Yeah, so I think it's just about finding people that really care about you. And if you can find those people, it doesn't have to be your family. People are
But and you also
important.
said you said the people at work in your first job help with
Mhm.
that. Um, yeah, so I assume also maybe some friends. But I also kind of heard that you didn't have these kind of teachers or people like that that were supporting you at that time, because that some people have that at the early age as a
Mhm.
teenager, but it doesn't sound like you felt that. You felt it only at your first job, if
Yeah,
I'm correct.
I didn't really go to class very much. I didn't
Mm.
like class. My grades were great, which is why I could skip so much class, but I just found the idea of sitting in a room listening to someone talk at me in a monotone voice archaic, and I didn't want to go.
Yeah, I can imagine. But of course, then it doesn't help to get to learn other stuff that we usually learn from peers and from other people.
Yep.
Okay, let's jump into that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, and of course it's still you're still young, you still have lots of options, but still, was there something to be destined for you to do when you were younger?
See, this question, I've tried a lot of different jobs. I think I've tried 7 different jobs, and I'm 24, and that's like in professional
Wow.
settings too. Yeah, because I did co-op and I really made good use of that. Um, so I've tried them and I did pretty well at most of them. And so I never felt like there was anything destined for me. What I do look for is people. So long as I love the people that I work with, I don't really care what I do. But one thing I do love having in my job is like I want to help people. So even now as an agile person, Like I hold sessions with some of my peers too, like healing sessions, I can call them, I think, legally. Um, and we talk about their trauma, and we talk about how that's coming up at work and how we can see it in their behavior patterns and all of that kind of stuff, because this is the kind of thing that I went through, and I hear them, I empathize with them. And so I think maybe a therapist or going into psychology, being able to help people like that. But I do love being in the work context and being able to help people at work because I have a relationship with them, but also because I see them. I see them every day. I see the way they interact. It gives me so much insight into what's actually going on with them. And I think it's almost like a superpower to be able to help them, to be able to see and acknowledge, like, wow, like you really like had an extreme reaction here, whereas if I was external to this environment, I wouldn't know that, and they might not even understand it or know it, because that extreme reaction to them is normal.
That's really, yeah, and I think what, well, like you say, or kind of say in between the lines, is at work there is so much need for this kind of things, so much need for people to validate that and see people as people,
Hmm.
and yeah, and in that sense, well, like you say, you're, for me 24 is rather young. I'm on double the age, but at the same time it feels like you're an old spirit, that you've been already through a lot. If you say that from age 14 you started to notice things, or people gave feedback and stuff like that
Hmm.
at that time, then yeah, that's already 10 years that of work on yourself and on understanding, because understanding other people starts with understanding yourself, of course.
Hmm.
And that's yeah, in that sense I can definitely see the way you talked already, both about what happened at home, what happened with you, that
Hmm.
yeah, you did a lot of personal work that made you grow, but also in the way you use it today is helping other people grow.
Hmm.
And in that sense, it's interesting. It's not a different job, and it's a different job at the same time. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's helping people, and there's a lot of things that you do now. And what I'm hearing is you prefer to do it in a work environment because you like to see people in action, which
Hmm.
is something you have that well, most therapists don't have, of course, because yeah, they only see it, how would I say it, yeah, they only hear what people say, and most people don't understand enough their own emotions, or enough what they happened, or their own reactions. So that's very nice that that you can do that. I like that.
Yeah, one I'm so proud of one of my people. We got to a point after a couple weeks of work, he was having a problem with a coworker. The conclusion that he reached is he was saying, "My problem with the coworker is me. It's not him.
Mm.
I am reacting to him. No one else is reacting to him. It's just me. So therefore, I
Mm.
have to be the problem."
So that's interesting. If you can help people to see that, then it's
Mhm.
really powerful. Because indeed, well, and even if the other person is the problem, it's still hard to make people, other people change. If you can change yourself, you have much more options, of course. But
Exactly.
it's really hard to understand that for many people.
Hmm.
And it's yeah, I had a recent yeah, conflict is maybe a strong word, but I had something with another person that I yeah, at some point I said, let's stop this conversation, because I first want to understand it much better myself before I want to go and continue. And I did understand that it's really about that interaction. There was nothing else going on in my life, so it really was about that interaction. But
Hmm.
still, for me, I want to make sure I understand it much better, why I reacted to some of that stuff, so
Hmm.
that I can explain it better, why some
Hmm.
things are hard and others are not.
Yeah, and
So
taking that step back is so important.
yeah, and it's interesting at the moment that I say that then I get a whole mail back and say, yeah, that's like, no, wait a minute, I said take a step back. I want to take a step back, and of course it's hard because you won't hear from me until I've worked on it, and that might
Mhm.
take a while. But yeah,
continuing that conversation doesn't help at that moment. It's
Mhm.
of course the opposite is dropping it, and that's also not what I want to do. But sometimes it's first good to work on it yourself. Let's move to that next question. What is for you currently your biggest challenge, or at least the biggest challenge that you want to share, and why is that a good
Mm.
thing for you?
I mean, I'm under the perspective that every challenge I have is just me.
Mhm.
And it's about my reactions and my beliefs and my trauma or whatever it might be coming up. And if I choose to work on that, then, I won't have any problems, or I'll always have at least a way through to a solution. So I think personally, one of the biggest challenges there, the fundamental one that I'm working through right now is just a crippling lack of self-worth. It's
Mhm.
absolutely terrible. I'm constantly seeking validation. I'm constantly seeking that sort of praise, but it doesn't do anything for me. It just feeds this bottomless pit of inability for me to validate myself. So that's what I'm working on right now, and I think if I, start to heal that, like every ounce of healing will help all of my other problems, because I think a lot of them stem from this. Any issues with ego, any issues with that.
When you started talking about, okay, everything I see, I put on myself, I was like, it's like we just discussed before. It's healthy because
Mhm.
you can work on it, but at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on you. And well, to exaggerate it a little bit, you're not the reason why we don't have world peace, for example.
Mm,
You might feel it like that way, but yeah, there are still things that the problem is the other person
mhm.
that you can't solve. So yeah, I
Yeah.
can definitely feel that
Mm.
puts a lot of pressure on yourself.
I honestly feel like it makes it easier, because for me,
Mm.
knowing that I don't have an answer and I just have to like either work around someone else's issues or do something around someone else. For me, if it's some like if it true, and obviously I don't blame myself for something like world hunger. Like for me, I'm like, well, I do what I can, but that's all I can do. But, even if it's like blatantly someone else is doing something damaging or harmful, I still look at how I can choose to react to that situation. And if I am adding damage to it, then that's something I need to work on, because I think there is always a way that you can um, react, maybe not necessarily positively, but in a way that will, at a minimum, not inflame the situation, and at its best, improve it. So if I keep focusing on how I can improve situations rather than focusing on challenges other people might have with themselves or might pose for me, then I think I just win in the end.
Yeah, I see that, but at the same time, you put the bar for yourself really, really high. I mean,
Mm,
because that means that whatever happens to you with
mhm,
someone else, you kind of look at it for yourself. And I can imagine,
mm,
well, you talked about that internal monologue. Okay, how can I deal with that? The,
mhm.
is the are you do you allow yourself to relax and let go of some of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, there's it depends on the severity of the issue, right? If I didn't respond well during stand up, someone said something, and for example, heightened emotions are very triggering for me, because, hearing someone angry, sad, upset is um like I'm like, oh no, like that's not good. That could cause like
Mm.
damage, that could cause this or that. And so a lot of the times I have to make sure that my own response is not coming from a place of absorbing what they're feeling. But even in cases like that, like I can't police everyone during stand up, nor should I be policing people for how they're feeling. I should be, helping people. But I
Mm.
hear what you're saying. I definitely think my bar for myself is very high. My partner tells me that all the time. He's constantly he's the one that really helps me. sort of take a step back and acknowledge everything I've done. But that's where the self-worth problem comes in, right? If I don't feel worthy of myself, then how could I ever stop trying to improve because I don't feel good about where I am, which is why I gotta fix that.
It's interesting that you already know at that age, because, and I link it indeed, again, let's not go to the full therapy, but I link it indeed to what you say, that you have to take that role as a sub parent or as a co-parent somehow for you, because that's I feel it's well, maybe it's wrong, but it feels linked to that you're responsible for the emotions of your brothers at that time and stuff like that, where it's at that young age. Well, first of all, at any age, you're not responsible for them because you're just a sibling. But if that happens at a very young age, then it's really hard to do that. And yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's linked to that. And I think it's also just linked to me wanting to feel good. Like I just want to wake up in the morning and be happy, just happy. And I think a lot of what I'm doing is trying to help me find that happy, find that peace, find that relax. And because I wasn't happy for a really long time. Even nowadays, I would say if I wake up content, then that's a good day, you know? I don't have to be happy all the time. I don't have to be, you know, in a positive space or headspace. I'm just looking for content right now and increasing the number of happy days.
Well, yeah. For me, you can't always be on the high, because if you're always on the high, that's no high, and or we need low days to enjoy the high days in a way, in a sense. So I definitely understand that content might be the better thing to go for, and then have better days and sometimes have worse days. So, but it's incredible at that even at the age of 24 you already think at that level, because I see many people your age, and if I just look at myself at that age, I was indeed maybe in the same headspace, but at the same time not even realizing it or thinking at that level. It took me a lot more years to get there. So
Yeah,
it's
well,
amazing that you can do this already.
thank you. I've had a lot of support from my dad because he spent a lot of time trying to get into this sort of space too. Um, so whatever he's learned, he just like chucks it at us and he's like, "Here you go. This helped me, maybe it'll help you." And that's been really helpful, having a support unit that's able to actually understand this stuff and to help me through it without being judging of it, or at least judging the best that he can. He's getting really good at it though.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're not going to discuss your dad in his situation, but indeed, I know that he's been through a lot of work on himself as well. That in a sense, he talked in this podcast also about it, with the work that he did with Audrey and finding them, both of them themselves, and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's and then it's good that he can, well, at least, even if there was some lack in the earlier part of your life, that you can still learn from it at this age. So definitely there is some support there. Let's move to that next question, and I think you kind of already talked a little bit about it. That what drives you, and what? Yeah, because I feel like in this whole conversation, you're a very passionate person. You really want to help out other people, and so you know where that passion is coming from.
I I may be in some ways selfish, but happy people are fun to be around. You know,
Mm.
miserable people, I don't enjoy going to work with miserable people. I don't really
Mm.
want to be around miserable people. So, you know, if I can
So
work hard.
you make them, so you help them become, yeah, be more happier, and then it's more enjoyable for you. That's a little bit what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yeah. And like obviously like I want them to be happy because it makes me feel like warm and fuzzy inside to know that they're waking up with enjoyment, or they're not waking up with like depression or sadness, and knowing that I've been able to make a difference in their lives at work, that they enjoy coming to work. Like I really like enjoy that side of like the almost I don't even need like verbal appreciation. Like I know when people are happy and when people are
Mm.
not. I have a mood chart that I use during stand up, so everyone picks a cute adorable little dragon sticker or something like that that represents their mood. So people tend to be very honest with it. You know, sometimes people are drained, sometimes people are happy, but I think it's pretty obvious when people are feeling not so good, and
Mm.
feeling
And
good feels good.
so, and what I'm also hearing is that, yeah, you don't need that maybe appreciation that you did it or whatever, but if you see their mood improving by conversations with you or whatever, that yeah, this is already for you a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but at the same time, I heard you say earlier on that, yeah, sometimes you're hard on yourself, and it's kind of hard for you to appreciate and things like that. Is that easy for you when people appreciate you to let it in when things?
No, I am a master at deflecting that or like capturing it and putting it to the side for later or not later. It's definitely something I have struggled with from all of my memory. Even as a kid, people would say your eyes are beautiful, and I'd be like, okay.
Mm.
I didn't understand it. I didn't understand compliments or praise, and it's just something I definitely crave, but I still am learning how to accept and actually let in. And I think it's because I think the fact that I've been so bad at it for so long compounds how challenging it is to let it in. Because once I do, that fundamentally feels like it's going to fundamentally change me as a person.
But I see, well, for example, just like 5 minutes ago, I said something and you said thank you. So it felt, I asked the question because it felt like it was easy. So I'm a little bit surprised by your answer.
Yeah.
Not because the rest of the story, but it felt like you even grew there already. Uh, so it's
I
getting better. Is that what, that's at least that's my feeling, but maybe I'm completely wrong because we're just talking for a small time.
So it definitely is getting better, and I try and make a mental note. Where I'm at right now is I'm trying to say thank you. And even if I can't let it in and I say thank you, because acknowledging it, I think, is the first step. Acknowledging that someone said something kind about me or positive about me or is validating me in some way. So saying thank you is my first step, because before that I'd be like, anyway.
You basically ignore or say something like, yeah, that's normal,
Yeah.
or and
Hmm.
if people talk about your eyes, then you would say, yeah, it's my dad's or whatever,
Yeah.
wherever you feel that it, but it's not your
Hmm.
eyes, something like that. And now what I'm hearing is you say thank you, and it's already kind of arriving, but not fully. It still is somewhere. I know I have to say
Yeah.
thank you, so I acknowledge it, but it's
Hmm.
still kind of it feels like it's in a waiting room or something like that. Is that how it
Yeah,
feels?
exactly. And it's not even that I feel like I should be saying thank you. It's that I want to be able to say and acknowledge and feel that thanks, which is why I say it. So that maybe hopefully I can reprogram my brain to have it be linked to a deeper meaning.
Yeah, I like it because for me, a lot of things that we do, it's much easier to act ourselves in a new way of thinking than to think ourselves in a new way of acting. So
Mhm.
by saying it, yeah, indeed, I can imagine it. Well, at least it worked for me. It worked for
Mhm.
me to reprogram my brain in being much more acknowledged when people say
Mhm.
thank you or whatever. And it's kind of crazy that a lot of people have that same craving and have that kind of hard thing because what I've noticed in coaching is that the people who need to hear the praising most are also the same kind of people who brush it off and say, yeah, but this is normal. I'm like, no, wait a minute. I just gave you a compliment because I mean it. And I have to
Mhm.
say, when you said thank you, it didn't feel like you were ignoring it or feel like it was waiting. It really felt like it was already accepted. Even that, if that maybe was not the case, it really
Mhm.
felt genuine to me. So that is probably already a second step, or I don't know where it is, but that's
Yeah.
and in a
Progress.
sense. Yes, progress, exactly. And that brings me kind of to that next question, is that what do you consider your biggest achievement? And from what you said earlier on, I assume that it's hard for you to talk about achievements and to brag, because basically this is your moment to brag. And I think that's kind of hard for you, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely, and it's interesting. It's very hard for me, but I also want to talk about it all the time, right?
Hmm.
So when I'm asked directly the question, it's hard for me because someone else is asking me to acknowledge my greatest achievement. But when I'm just being like, hey guys, so I did this, like it feels more casual. And I feel like I'm able to celebrate it a little bit more. So yes, questions like this are very hard, and my managers have struggled with me in one-on-ones because I try and
Deflect that.
divert. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I think who I am now and the way I show up at work is my biggest achievement. I have put hours into becoming healthier as a person, physically, mentally, emotionally, and it shows at work. You know, my manager and I started at my company Lumetto at the same time, and he actually acknowledged 3 months in that the team trusted me, believed in me, would come to me instead of him for stuff that was going on, not because he's a bad manager, but because they inherently trusted me so much more after a really short period of time. And that's when he and I started working together rather than separately because he acknowledged how much just how I was able to get people to be safe and comfortable in the span of just one or two one-on-ones. Just
Wow.
they wanted to talk to me about this kind of stuff. They wanted to trust me with what was going on because they can feel the sincerity of how much I want to help them and how much I believe in them and how much I care about them. Even if, I don't talk to them all the time, I wish them well, like really from the bottom of my heart and my whole being.
That's
And I,
that's that's amazing. If you can do that in well, like you say, in just a few conversations, that is a big achievement, and you should really be proud of it. And having your manager tell you that after just a couple of months, it's wow. Yeah, it's I don't know what else to say, but it's indeed an achievement that you can be really proud of. And um, is that so? You said it's hard to acknowledge that is something that you can. How easy was that conversation with your manager when this person told you this?
it's taken me a couple of months to really let it sit in. I was like, "Oh, what do you need me to do?" When he said that. I was like, "How can I help you?" And he was like, "No, no, Scarlett, like you have to understand." And I think he's left the company now, but by the end of it, I think he really had my number with this. Because he would take time to make sure that I had space to let stuff sink in, that he was giving me compliments on, or he was, just appreciating about what I do. And he and I work so well together because he was so appreciative of this skill that I had and realized how much good he and I can do at the company if we work together. And he was like, I'm a little bit frustrated because you make it look easy, and that makes me feel that makes me feel like I am a bad manager. And I was like, no, you're the best.
Yeah, and it's not about being a bad manager, but it's indeed it's acknowledging what you're doing, and yes, you could be just good at that for all the work that you did all the years on yourself, of course, and like you say, there's still place to grow. There is still a lot to learn, but it's amazing that you can do this already at this age, and that's a very nice achievement to hear. And I hope it sounds also that you could let it in, but I hope you can keep letting things in like that. So because that will help you probably on the other parts of your life.
Yeah, for sure. I'm working on it.
Sounds like it. Okay, let's move to that next question. Do you have a personal agility tip? Because you did multiple kind of roles, almost maybe not all roles in the development team, but you did multiple roles. So, what is a tip that you want to share with people here?
I would say one of the patterns that I have noticed across all of my time, and I was doing agile stuff with my dad at like 14, so I've seen more teams than you might expect at my age, is that your team probably does not feel safe. And that if you assume they feel safe, you will likely fail. Start by assuming that they don't trust you and they don't feel safe, and see if you can find I guess actions, words, and not words like "Do you feel safe?" And they're like, "Yeah, like I totally feel safe." Most of the time, if they don't feel safe, they will say
Exactly.
that. So you need to find other ways that contradict those two those two statements. For example, I know people on my team feel safe with me because they regularly message me on Slack to talk about things that are bothering them. And people don't do that unless they're feeling safe and that they can trust me, because they ask me not to relay it to other people, these discussions that we're having, the contents of it. So I know that they trust me because they're choosing me, because they're talking about stuff that's making them vulnerable, and because they do it regularly, meaning I've maintained that safety and trust.
I really like the way you phrase it, because the worst thing you can do for creating trust is telling the people in your team, you can trust me. But that's definitely not the thing that creates trust. It's like, I'm safe. Well, no, if you need to say that, then you probably are not.
Yeah, and that's something I've noticed at tons of companies, and even little things like, I've seen people say like, why didn't you guys tell me that there was a problem with this instead of just quietly working on it? Like, I'm like, yeah, well, now they're definitely gonna tell you, like, okay, all
Exactly.
right. So I think it's about, like, really, if you are, managing a team as a scrum master, as a product owner, as a project manager, just make sure that what you're saying and the way that you're talking to the team lets them feel like they have space to speak, because that's how the trust is going to start. And if the scope's too high and no one says anything, and this is, for example, a common repeated pattern of lack of safety, you set a scope, it never gets finished. Whether you're doing Scrum and no one's ever completing stuff at the end of a sprint, or you're doing Kanban and there was a release planning session and you had intended to do XYZ and it's not getting done, or the team's committing to dates and it's never getting hit, chances are they know that they're not going to be able to hit this. I would bet a substantial amount of money that they know it's not possible, but they are not telling them because they don't feel like it's safer to fail at achieving that than it is to say we can't do this.
Yeah, because people will then go into it, and like you say, it's probably better. I really love your example about why didn't you tell me, because that's it doesn't help. It's much better as a manager than to say, well, I really feel sorry that I didn't pick up these things and become
Mhm.
vulnerable themselves. That might help, but telling why didn't you tell me, it's
Mhm.
again, it feels blaming, and that's not helping. I really like that tip, because it's so important to create that space, and it buys right into what you said earlier on having people telling you these kind of things. Psychological safety, we talk a lot about it in the agile space. It's really important, and at the same time it's really hard. And there is also not really a book that you can say, okay, this is how you create it. There's definitely a book on how not to create it and how to break psychological safety. That's very easy. Um, but yeah, creating it takes a lot of time and a lot of vulnerability in
Mhm.
having these kind of things. So thank you for sharing that. I want to move to that next part, and I have no. Well, you in the pre-talk you talked a little bit about Twitch and stuff like that. So,
Mhm.
is there anything that you have as tips for remote working that you want to share? Because you, for me, are the generation that it feels much more logical to work remotely than it was for my age and your dad's age in the sense that.
I hate working remotely, at
Mm,
least full time. I miss my teammates. I miss getting to see them in person. And Numeto is a remote first company. Everyone works remotely. We got people in Italy, we got people in the US, we got people on the West Coast. And we get a ton of different personalities, which is awesome. But it's just not great. Now, I don't want to go in every day. I calculated how much more it would cost me as a person to commute into work from where I am, and it's a lot of money, especially with my travel time. But I think with remote working, my biggest question for I guess people considering it or people wanting to move to it or stay with it is that have you budgeted time in the year for people to be together? If you're fully
mhm,
remote working, then I think it should be at a minimum once a year. You need to get everyone together just so they can meet each other. The amount of, increased communication I've had from meeting my coworkers, the ones that live close enough that we could maybe meet up from time to time, is crazy. It only happened once, but that's all I really needed to develop a much stronger understanding of who they are as a person, even though I talk to these people all day. Um, I also think that if you are considering remote working, it's gonna feel really inorganic to plan stuff. Everything is gonna feel inorganic. Everything's gonna feel hard and forced and all of this kind of stuff. But what I've noticed is it doesn't matter. If you want to do fun stuff and it feels weird to invite everyone to go play a game because it feels like you're kind of forcing it, or it's not like, hey guys, do you want to like go play a board game when you're at work, or do you want to play with Lego? Like most of the time that feels casual, but sending a meeting invite for playing a game feels really
mhm.
uncomfortable, at least to me. um but you just got to do
Yeah.
it. It's not a reason not to do stuff.
It feels a little bit, and you're probably not yet at that age, but
Mhm.
at some point in a relationship, you need to plan also to have date nights and stuff like that, because otherwise there is work and there is kids and there is all that kind of other kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And it feels, like you say, it feels very strange and we should just do it normally. But if you
Mhm.
don't do it, you don't plan it, then it doesn't happen. And so I recognize that indeed at work, uh, we sometimes have to do these things. It might feel strange, but once you're there and the people who show up, it feels much more natural.
Mhm.
And we usually forget these kind of things, and I like that you bring that up because these kind of, yeah, I acknowledge it. These kind of meetings, it feels very strange. It's like, what do I want to? Yeah, and again, probably not everybody has to join, especially if you're working in different time zones. But the people who are there are the right people, and it will help that kind of conversation a little bit. Like when you say, who wants to play a board game? If you're in a company, some people will join and others won't, and that's
Yeah.
fine as well.
Mhm.
It's
And I think what you say about date night and stuff like that rings very true because it's also about fitting this within your schedule, right? And I think that's something companies are not doing, where they don't give people time to actually have fun at work. Whereas in the office, I don't know a lot of companies that would have cared if you grabbed someone for 15 minutes to chat, but somehow having a 15-minute conversation remotely feels like you're doing time theft or something at work, which is crazy to me. And I think it's about companies giving permission or even saying, hey guys, every sprint you have X number of hours, use it how you want, put it in your calendar. We want to see you guys connecting casually.
Yeah, because it helps, and it's maybe not efficient, but it's much more effective, and
Mm-hmm.
that brings it again to that first connection that you talked about before. Yeah, if a person has a bad day and you don't understand it because there is a project to finish, well, ignoring that will make it not go faster, and just taking 5 to 10 minutes about, okay, you had a bad day because whatever happened might actually help you to get it out of your system, and then you can focus on your project. And so in the
Mm-hmm.
end you win time. But and yeah, it's already hard at school for some people, like you were saying, but at work it's usually much harder, because it's like, yeah, come on, but let's skip it, let's we have work to do. Well, yeah, okay, but if you had a shitty night, or if you had whatever happened in your personal life, then yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely going to help. I also liked what you said, not as the tip, but earlier on, that you calculated the time it would take you to go to the office. I think much more people need to do it, because if I look at how I went, usually you start out working not that far, so it's like, okay, this is a 10-minute drive, that's okay, and then the next job is a little bit a better job, so it takes maybe 5 minutes longer, and before you know it, 10 years later, it's like an hour or 2 hour drive every day. One of and now, of course, thanks to COVID, we all realize it. Wait a minute, I win two or whatever that many hours, but it's very tempting to forget it already. About, okay, how much time do we actually lose on some of that commute? I just had a colleague, I think it was yesterday, coming into the office. There were some problems on the train, and very quickly decided, no, let's go back, because if this is already starting out this bad, it will probably take me another hour before I get to the office. I can much better go back. And it's not ideal, because I wanted to be in person, but it's much better. And we dealt with it, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the fact that, yeah, like you say, we need to calculate that from time to time. So it's a bonus tip. I thank you for that.
Yeah.
Let's move to that next question. What's a book that you want to talk about?
So this is more of a book series, and it's not at all related to Agile in the absolute slightest. It's a new adult romance novel. Novels, I guess. It's called A Court of Rose and Thorns. Um, and I'm gonna cherry pick. Spoiler alert! If you want to
I
read
I,
these. Oh,
I
sorry. A
thought it
Court
was,
of Mist and Fury. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. The Court of Rose and Thorns is the first book in it. So this is the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury. Um, if you would like to read these books, skip ahead to the next section. There will be major spoilers. Um, so one of the things that I love about these books is this idea of a healthy relationship. And this isn't something I've really understood a lot about growing up. And so the main character in the book, the female, ends up she's taking care of her siblings, she's hunting, she's really running herself ragged trying to take care of other people. And she meets this guy and they don't get along at first, but then they end up, falling in love, and he's a really good protector and he's taking care of her and he takes care of her siblings and everything's okay and she can just focus on art and what she loves to do and she doesn't have to think about anything, and he's constantly doing things to make her more comfortable. Now, he does this without asking her because he's constantly thinking of ways to make her more comfortable. So, for example, this is a fantasy book as well. So they have different creatures, and he magicked all the creatures to look like humans so she would be more comfortable, even though it's like different species working in his household. So eventually she ends up overcoming some of these problems and she starts to grow as a person. And suddenly this protective, loving environment becomes suffocating because she
Mm.
wants to start to participate. She wants to start to be more than just someone who's being taken care of. She wants to start to have autonomy. And he doesn't like this. He doesn't understand why she's different, why she's wanting this, why she's asking for this. And he, because of his own trauma and what he has been through, starts to make her feel guilty for wanting it, starts to make her feel badly for wanting it. Now, because of
He
plot.
wants to take care of her. That's what
Mhm.
I'm hearing. And he
Yeah.
feels not validated because he can no longer take care of it. Is that what I'm
Yeah.
hearing?
Yeah, she wants to help like manage his estate and like manage his people, and she really wants to start to contribute to his household and to society. And he doesn't want her to do that because it makes him feel good to take care of her. He wants someone who needs to be taken care of because that's his own like trauma stuff. And so she ends up, another guy comes in. She's supposed to marry this first guy that she's now miserable with, but she feels guilty about being miserable with, so she's trying to pretend to be happy. And this other guy comes in and he tells her to do everything by herself, unless she asks for help, in which case he'll help her. So she's being thrown into this situation where, he's supporting her every need whenever she asks for support, but he doesn't overstep any boundaries. And she starts to feel really guilty because she starts to really appreciate this other person. He's not doing anything romantic, he's not really doing anything at all other than being a good friend. And she starts to draw these parallels between her relationship with him and her relationship with this other guy. Now she makes friends over in this other place too that also have a similar support system. You can do it yourself. We believe in you. You're a strong, independent woman. But if you need help, we're here. That's totally fine. And she keeps on having to go back to this other environment where this guy's like, don't worry about it. Like, I already chose what you're having for dinner. I chose what you're going to wear tomorrow. You don't have to think. You can just be happy. And she's like, I don't want to wear that. And he's like, but you liked it before. So she's now seeing all of these things she loved about him suddenly becoming oppressive, even more so than they were before when she didn't understand why it felt oppressive. So when she ends up leaving the first guy, the first guy for the second guy, what's really interesting is the first guy's behavior. He doesn't acknowledge her choice. He believes she's been kidnapped and she was forced to do all this stuff, even though she told him she wanted it. He was like, he got into your brain. He's forcing you to say this stuff.
Where
And
he's actually forcing her to behave the way he wants, and the other person is not forcing anything.
mhm.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it was really interesting for me to see that, she goes from being underweight and depressed with this first guy to being like very fit, very active. She learns to read for the first time because she came from a poor family. She really grows as a person under or with this second group of people that really love her and care about her just for her being her. They don't expect anything of her, they don't want anything of her, but they want her to take steps as she's ready to. So, reading this made me realize how many of these qualities that we think are endearing, like, passionate obsession or like, protection in the name of love, when it's really controlling natures, like, a lot of the time these are very idealized qualities. And I love that this
Mm.
book just took it apart and said, no, this isn't what women need. This isn't what people need. This is his trauma, and it's not his fault that he's acting this way, but it doesn't mean we have to be a part of it.
I
And
really like it because it brings me back to some of the things that I once heard about parenting is that you both need, because you need both. In a sense, you need, especially when you're young, you need someone who's taking care of you, but you also need the kind of parent that kind of kicks you out of the door and says, okay, now it's time to stand on your own feet, and we'll
mhm,
support you if you need help. But we kind of need both stances, and it doesn't matter. The official thing is that the first stance is more the motherhood and the other is more the father, but it doesn't matter if it's a mother or father doing it, but we need kind of both of these kind of things.
mhm.
It's interesting, and so that's and that had a real impact on you, I hear.
Yeah, it like I had been in a lot of like whether it was a friendship or a relationship that had that controlling aspect. We get into a fight and I'd want to take a step back and I'd get hit with the you don't love me or something like that or you don't care about me. So for me, that type of controlling obsession was what I associated with love. So seeing this, I was like I was pretty shocked. I was like, I didn't realize people could be like that. I didn't understand that was a way to show affection, was quiet support. And that's something that really fundamentally changed the way I viewed relationships and what a healthy relationship is, and what supporting someone looks like. Because oftentimes, I think with women, you get this type of female toxicity where women say like really mean things to each other, but it's because they want to be honest or they want to tell you something that they don't agree with. And I had a friend um try and do stuff like that to me, and it occurred to me that maybe she was like this first guy, like she wants to control my opinions, my thoughts, my behavior because it's very comfortable for her. She'd tell me that I had to see her at least once a week. She'd tell me all of these things, and eventually I was like, "Oh my gosh, this isn't healthy. This isn't deep affection for me. This is her trauma coming out and negatively impacting me."
Because she
So,
needed you more than you needed her. So she was saying, I need you once a week, not like you need to see me and whatever. And you
mhm.
didn't even have a choice. That feels real. And how old were you when you read that book? Because it shows that it has a real impact on you.
I think I was like in my early 20s, like maybe 20 or 21. Um, and yeah, it was very there are so many other good parallels this book draws about like other issues. Um,
But it's a story, yeah. It's
mhm,
really right. So because you kind of analyze it in a way, but from what I understand, it's just a story, and you realize it by reading the book. But
mhm.
the book doesn't explain that these things are happening. You just read it, and
Yeah, like the author does a little bit of she does mostly showing, she does a little bit of telling. Like she'll throw in key words like I don't need to be protected, like as the protagonist's thoughts, the female protagonist. So she draws the lines like dotted lines. She doesn't like force you to be like here is A, there is B. We're going from A to B now. So it's more like remember A over there? Yeah, look at B over there. I wonder if there's a connection.
she lets you think on your own because
Mhm.
some people might not even realize it, and so in a sense she's doing what she's talking about as well,
Yeah.
that she doesn't force you to think that or that way.
Mhm.
It's so thank you, because in a sense it's, you say it's not an agile book, and at the same time it feels like this is, that second person feels very much like a scrum master should act like. Indeed, the scrum master is helping a team and removing impediments, but at the
Mhm.
same time a team, because removing an impediment or helping a team that doesn't see the problem is not helping them. It's
Yeah.
trying to rescue them, and most people don't like to be rescued.
Mhm.
I like to be rescued when I know I'm in trouble, but if I don't know I'm in trouble, then rescuing feels a little
Mhm.
bit like you said, that first person.
Mhm.
It's yeah.
100%. Like one of the big, I guess, things for her that she felt very embarrassed about is she didn't know how to read. And so he tried to, the first thing he did, he was like, you should read these history books. And she put up a big fight about it. He's like, wait, like why is this like, is it the books that are bothering you? Like, why are you having this reaction? Which is I think a very Scrum Master thing to do, to be like, this was not a crazy suggestion. Why is the reaction like this? And then she admitted to him, I don't know how to read. So they went back and started at the actual place they needed to start, not where he thought she should start.
Because indeed in the beginning he didn't know, and she was, yeah,
Hmm.
he created that place, that safe place for her to admit that she couldn't read,
Hmm.
and at the same time he didn't solve it for her by reading the books to her. No, he actually said, okay, let's see what you need. Where
Hmm.
what I'm hearing, that first person would maybe
Read
read
the
for you,
books.
or
Hmm.
exactly, and not yeah, not help you in reading the books,
Hmm.
and learning how to do so. That's it's a very nice, and so what you say, it's a series of books, right?
Hmm.
So it's multiple books. So
Yeah.
it sounds like again another book to read for me. So but that's what. But it's interesting because I these days I usually don't like to read books anymore that are not business wise, in the sense that
Hmm.
I've read my tons of novels. But this is one of these books that it feels like, wow, there's so much lessons to learn, and at the same time there is interesting. So I really like the way that you make publicity for that book. So it's definitely going to go on my list to read, and maybe even tell my children to read, because you learn a lot about relationships from it, and that's the best way to all of us, we still need to learn a lot about relationship, I think, because we all have our own traumas. That's one thing I've learned over the years, that whatever you do as a parent, you still give traumas to your children, no matter how good you try to do. And we all have our own traumas that we don't always know where they come, or sometimes you know where they're coming from, but not always. So thank you for sharing that, because it sounds like a very interesting one to read for me as well. So let's move to that, for me, one of the most interesting questions, but I don't even dare to say that, because this conversation has already been very interesting. But what question do you also think I should ask, and what's the answer?
So I think one of the most helpful questions for me to ask, or what I think is an interesting question to ask, is more along the lines of, when was the last time you reflected on a conversation you had with someone where it didn't go the way you wanted, and what was your contribution to that outcome?
Wow, that's a very, very deep question, because it has multiple layers already, yeah. Just realizing that you had such a question, and then realizing there is a part of me in that. So I'm now even more interested in knowing, after everything you already shared, is there something that you want to share public about such a
So,
relation, such a conversation?
yeah, I have an example that happened last week at work. One of my coworkers had told me that they were going to share a design for a new feature, and they had told me it was going to be the simplest technical solution, because we do not have time for this feature, but it's a project and there's a harsh deadline. Scope is the only thing that's really not locked. Um, and I had been telling the team that it was going to be super simple. And so we have this meeting, the C-level execs are in it. And this feature to me has all of the bells and hecking whistles. It's like, it was an incredible design, and it was way too much work. And I had team members messaging me like a little bit panicked, like, I don't, like, we can't do this. So I said, this is impossible. In the time we have, this is impossible. We cannot do it unless we cut scope. The design is gorgeous. I love it. I would love to implement it, but we cannot. And that sort of opened the floodgates. And everyone started talking about ways that it wasn't possible and things that we wouldn't be able to do, and why we wouldn't be able to do it, and how we could maybe do something different or do something else. Um, and when we came back to it later, I was disappointed in the way I handled it. I was in full fight or flight. I was about to knock some people's teeth for doing this to the team. I was not happy at all. I couldn't believe that they had done this. And so I was fully in judgment. I was in anger. I was in all of these places. And, I was like, well, what would I have said if I hadn't been in those places? And really, I would have asked a question: is, how do you think this would fit within our scope?
And
Because,
then you put the responsibility and to the other side in that sense.
and like, everyone I work with is incredibly intelligent. Like, I feel very, I mean, I apologize for it, but, and I think, like, I definitely need to take responsibility there, because I basically decided it was an or situation. I can either support my teammate on the leadership team, or I can protect the team and give them safety and validation that their feelings and opinions are okay. And I didn't think about the and, because I was in that place of anger or judgment. And then when I found out later that people were upset about what I did, I was not quite upset about it. I was a little bit like, I didn't have a choice. But then I thought about it and I was like, no, I did have a choice and I chose wrong. I didn't chose the wrongest. It was still, I think, a valid option because the team was very grateful for what I did and what I said. But I don't want to be throwing my coworkers under the bus like that if I don't have to.
Yeah, and I also hear what you said just a few minutes ago, that you only had two options, and that reminds me of the late Jerry Weinberg, who used to say that if you have only two options, you didn't think hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have three options, you probably see four or five. And once you have more than three, once you have three options, it becomes very clear what's the best option. If there's only two, it's always a fight, and nobody's happy.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have more options, it becomes much more clear what's the better option. And usually once you have three, you will come to four or five
Mm-hmm.
options, and then it's much less a fight. It's much more like, okay, how can we mold it and how can we change it? So that's
And there's so much power in doing this stuff in retrospect too, because you do remember. I've thought about situations I've been in that have repeated, and I've remembered my thought process afterwards that, oh, if I was in this situation again, I'd want to do this. So definitely if something makes you uncomfortable or you wish you acted differently, it's really important to think about it because it makes sure you don't end up in that situation again and you can feel good about what you do.
I really like that when you're able to do that. And well, also you also, I from what I'm hearing, you were already open with the different people, the different parties, so both your team
Mhm.
and probably the leadership, in the sense that you learn from it. And okay, you make, we all make mistakes, so it's, for me, there's not really a problem with making mistake. It's much
Mhm.
more like, what can we learn from it, because this will happen again.
Mhm.
That definitely will happen in similar situation. I think I would encourage everyone who's listening to just put it in the comments if they had similar kind of things. But I think all of us, we have these kind of situations, and much more regular than we want. So knowing that there's much more options is really hard. It's good. And I think, it feels a little bit also, and I want to point it back what you said very earlier on, as a child, that you felt like, okay, I have to be that co-parent or whatever.
Mhm.
Well, there were more options than that, but of course, at that young age, you don't see these options,
Yeah.
like you say, and then later on, you realize, oh, I shouldn't be hard on
Mhm.
my friends or on my coworkers. Actually, I can be empathic and realize much more potential afterwards, when you see more of these options. So that's
Mhm.
so. Thank you for sharing, because I think it's a really good question to ask ourselves. It's hard because, like you say, you encounter your demons and you have to look at what somehow how you failed, but at the same time it avoids similar kind of failures later on in your life, I think. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's move to that next question about, who do you think that I should ask next? Who do you want to invite?
I would love to invite Vanessa Ewan. She was on the agile team and multiple teams at
I think that's
CGI.
Vanessa, right?
Uh,
No?
mm,
Did I mix up? Did I screw up?
maybe her. I'm not sure. That doesn't look like me. Could be
Okay,
from quite a few years
I,
ago.
well, it's interesting because usually I ask before and I check before, and now
Hmm.
we didn't. That's so I mixed up. But okay, it doesn't matter.
That's okay.
Uh,
She's
it's
working at
interesting.
She's working at Epic right now with Ron Laudadio. Both of them are amazing people, super insightful, and I've learned so much from both of them throughout my journey in Agile and just as a person.
And well, I'm going to take the risk again. Is this wrong?
Yeah, that's Ron.
At least I have one out of two correct, so that's good. So yeah, okay, that was a risk to now, if I screwed up once, that I could
Mhm.
screw up right. But so you learned a lot from working with both of them. That's what I'm
Mhm.
hearing.
Yeah,
It's well, it's
Ron. Ron is one of the best mentors I've ever had. He's like the first person that I think I really allowed to mentor me because problems with authority also run in my family. And he's someone I respect immensely, and he is the ultimate servant leader. If you want to learn about servant leadership, he is the master at it, 100%.
Well, it's a nice way to talk about the person, but I really like also what you say that you allowed him to mentor you, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what a lot of people don't realize, that sometimes we say this is a good or a bad mentor, but I really like that you realize that you need to allow that kind of, and of course there is a big part in him being a good mentor. That's definitely there because you need to, but at least you need to also to yourself be in a space in your life where you can allow these kind of things, and that's definitely. And well, I see a lot of things what happened, what you said when you were taking on that role as a parent, that
Mm-hmm.
that brings in a lot of problems with authority in all kind of directions. That's definitely for sure.
Yep.
And in a sense, and I can, well, if I just look at myself, I had lots of troubles with authority with my parents when I
Mm-hmm.
was young. And in a way, when your parents have a divorce, it's kind of hard to 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 have a fight with your parents at that time, because your parents are already doing that kind of fighting. So I think there is a lot of health in fighting authority with your parents. It's not always healthy, but
Mm-hmm.
it helps at multiple levels. And if your parents are already fighting, a lot of what, I don't know if it was for you, but I hear a lot of people holding back on these kind of things, and because of that, having trouble in accepting these kind of things on that. So yeah,
Yeah,
it feels
that.
like you have done a lot of work on yourself really throughout.
Mhm.
Well, just the 24 years that you have. So it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think I ever had any trouble fighting people, no matter what was going on. Um, I think for me, the divorce almost made me look down on them a little bit. Like, I was like, why would I respect you when you can't even do this? So it made me view myself at their level rather than putting them on a pedestal. So I'm sure I caused them many, many headaches with that
Yeah,
type of
but
view.
what I was saying is that for, I think as teenage, well, I, but again, it's
Mhm.
been way too long that I was a teenager. But I think as teenager, when you rebel against your parents, if they can stand there and say, "Okay, I let you
Mhm. That's
rebel
true.
and take care of it," it kind of grounds you as well in a
Mhm.
way. It kind of puts the thing like, "Okay, I can rebel, I can do these kind of things," and they're like, "Okay," and it feels like that wasn't there because there was so much trouble on their side, and like what I'm hearing is you
Mhm.
didn't respect them at that moment. I assume with what you said earlier on, that there is much more respect now than there
Mhm.
was at that time. Uh, also the fact that you had already a few relationships, it already showed you also that maybe relationship is not as hard, as easy as I thought at 14 it was, because then it's, well, I don't know how it was for you, but for me at 14, it looked like, okay, you just fell in love and then you stay there. And why don't people don't to do it? Because that's all the fairy tales are telling us.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's there's
100%.
yeah, it's either movies are always like either they meet each other and everything goes fine, or either it's all trouble, but you never see all the challenges. Like you say, you need. We talked about date nights and other things. This is hard work, a relationship, and first
Mhm.
of all on yourself, and then working on it as well. So it's thank you for sharing all of that, because it sounds like an incredible journey that you've been to, and it's you've been very open and sharing, and yeah, it was all what I was hoping for and much more. So it's been an incredible conversation. So thank you. If people want to reach out to you and say, okay, Scarlett, where can they find you?
LinkedIn is good.
So
Um,
that's I think that's the one. That's the link.
yep. Yeah, LinkedIn is, I think, my preferred mode of communication. I love DMing over emailing. I do not understand emails, but you know.
Like many people of your age and younger. I mean, my children, like, why would I email someone like that? I definitely see that. Yeah, there's definitely a completely different kind of conversations and different kind of communication for us and different ages. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope that to once again. Well, if you ever want to go to Belgium and visit us, you're welcome, because it feels like a wonderful conversation. So if your dad ever goes to Belgium again and you feel like joining, feel free to jump in. So
Thank you.
it's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been so much fun. I really love these kind of conversations. They feel so meaningful, and I hope that it's able to bring meaning to other people's lives as well who are listening.
Yeah, well, at least for me, it's been wonderful. It's nice to hear the whole story. Knowing, of course, I know your dad. I think I actually met you like years ago in Toronto, but now I'm talking like 15. But that was like doing a workshop with your father, and like I think in the evening jumping in a little bit. I remember your father talking to some of his children, but I don't know who was it. But it's yeah, of course, it's a completely different conversation once you're an adult, and then you can talk about all that work. It's been wonderful. So thank you very much, and let's meet again.
All right, let's meet again. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.